Hello there. Welcome to our series of IFAMA 2020 online, replacing the original Rotterdam conference, the 4-day conference. It's going to be an ongoing conference, and we hope it won't stop. This is the first in our series of panel discussions, and I'm happy to introduce to you Tiffany Tsui. She is a consultant. She has a long experience and set up her own Springtide Consultancy. Mary Shelman from Mary Shelman, a consultancy. She used to be running the Harvard Business School agribusiness program. And Aidan Connolly, an investor. He used to be at the AgriTech board, and now he is at AgriTech Capital, Aidan, and you're traveling the world. You told me when preparing this interview that your air miles mount up to get up to 1 million miles a year. Is that correct?
I'm afraid so. Yes, I'm afraid so.
and do you expect to travel as much next year?
I don't think so. I don't. It was 1 million miles just with Delta last year, and I'm sure they're not happy to have me say this, but in reality, we understand the world will be very different, and conferences and ways of communicating like we're doing today, I'm sure are going to be much more the norm than they've ever been before.
And as we can learn from your accent, you're Irish. You live in the US, but you're Irish.
Yeah. Well, some people would say I live in an airplane, but yes, Irish living in America.
Great. So we'll be talking about digitalization and digitization. What is the current state of digitization and digitalization, both from the perspective of China and the Western world? And in China, one could say that the last mile problem doesn't exist in cities, that is. Whereas the West is coping with enormous problems on the last mile because we all started out ordering meals, ordering the things we usually shop for, but we want them delivered on our doorstep. Now, in China, the problem was already solved. Tiffany, I'd like to start out with you. How come China is so advanced? And how advanced is it when you look back to our country, the two of us, we both live in the Netherlands, when you compare China to the Netherlands, at this point, the last mile, what are the differences? And obviously the second question is going to be, what can we learn from China? How can we do like the Chinese do? What is the difference? That's the first question.
Well, I live in the Netherlands, and I travel in the last years always regularly to China. So let me maybe also from my own experience to explain what I think difference is. One, for example, in China, that I have been not using any money for the last 3-4 years. So anywhere, everything, everywhere I go, I pay with WeChat. Even when you take a metro, when a beggar comes to you to ask for money, they don't accept cash anymore. They say you can scan my code. Well, WeChat, you pay me your donation. So
no credit card, no debit card, WeChat.
No WeChat, everything on. So there's several things in China that enables this nationwide infrastructure that enable basically a rapid penetration of e-commerce and digital infrastructure for especially urban citizens. One is this rise of WeChat, and WeChat is a combination of Facebook, Twitter, basically several apps combined into one. And it's a very powerful payment system nationwide. There is a competitor, Alipay, but WeChat in China is very widespread. So everything is either Alipay or WeChat. So that completely basically replaces cash. And that makes very convenient for anybody to be on that platform, start a business, get paid.
So no money.
No money.
But how come that the last mile problem is solved as well?
Yes, so that's one thing. The financial system is a major revolution, and with consolidation with these large players. Secondly, is infrastructure. So the logistic infrastructure e-platform, Jack Ma. So we cannot not talk about the Alibaba, and of course there's several big ones. Alibaba really rises to the, let's say, the national leading status in the last 10, 20, 15 years. I met Jack Ma when I was in Harvard. He gave a talk in 1999, my second year, about Alibaba platform. So, and then I thought him being very impressive, but at that moment I thought, okay, what is it? It's some kind of C2C online. So at that moment, nobody really understand what he's trying to do. And for a long time, people just think, I also kind of followed him a little bit from that impression. But for, I think 10 years after, you always hear Alibaba kind of existing and don't hear anything. But things really changes since 2003, the SARS. So SARS, currently we're dealing with COVID-19, which you can say is in some ways a recurrence of SARS. The SARS in 2003 has a much more limited geographical spread. It was mostly impacting China, a little bit the case outside of China, but not too much. But in China, several cities like I was in Beijing then, Beijing, Guangdong province, Hong Kong, that was very severe. So there was basically lockdown. And at that moment, Alibaba has to already deal with basic online working. So since that moment, you could say, Alibaba learned to quickly, for example, mobilize workforces to do online. And then also because of the hygienic public safety concern, e-commerce really start taking off after the SARS. So SARS gave a major boost to the whole e-commerce infrastructure by changing and shaping consumer behavior. So people are much more used to buying online. So that coupled with the financial revolution of payment, ease of payment, you can be trusted. It's very easy to set up compared, for example, just across the border from Hong Kong. I'm from Hong Kong. I always complain and say Hong Kong basically left behind in the last 10 years because Hong Kong you cannot pay by WeChat. So you have multiple different kind of payment system, but just across the border in the last 10 years, everything becomes so easy. So the payment system, the infrastructure, the e-commerce, the big players really, covering a nationwide coverage, that's when it enables the first, let's say, digital revolution in China since 2003.
So SARS actually did it as COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 is doing it in the Western world 17 years later.
Yes.
But now, how come because you can order something, and perhaps for people listening, what is the last mile? It's the thing, you order it, but you need to deliver it in my office, at my doorstep, wherever I am. How did China solve that problem? How come it's so easy to order and have it a few hours later?
There's a lot of development on that. One is the two big, of course, the big players like Alibaba with really connecting the chain, connecting the producers to the consumer. And Alibaba is investing a lot very much in the nationwide delivery system. So not just Alibaba, there's big ones like Jingdong and Shunfeng. So this all came actually on the same period. Alibaba is the e-commerce platform. Shunfeng is the actual courier, the physical delivery. Jingdong is another competing e-commerce. So you have an army of urban couriers. They very flexible. They go by bike, go by motorcycles, go by. So that also, a lot of rural migrants find their way into the cities, being the couriers. So that's a very big business. Of course, also cheap.
And is that a reason? Because people from rural areas migrate to the cities, and is that why there is such a well-developed postman system?
Yes, that's basically a source of supply of labor, and that is cheap labor, willing to do hard work, very tough jobs to deliver, and that's on the labor side. And also, for example, Alibaba is investing in mapping of basically they can map every centimeter of China to provide this, already paving the way for the next step, which is, automated drone delivery. That's already ready, basically. So, and then also the how the whole last mile is now shaping the whole urban space. There's a new term called the Hema circle. Hema is the new online channel of Alibaba. So basically, you can go to shop your fresh food there in the shop, in like supermarkets, but you can also have it delivered within half an hour. So in the current, let's say, the urban spaces, there are a lot of communities. It's number one criteria to live within 3-kilometer radius of a Hema shop, because then you guaranteed you have 30-minute delivery. That's your last mile is solved. They have people you order online. So in that, you can also think you changes the urban space completely. If your fresh food can be delivered within 30 minutes, you don't need a kitchen anymore. You don't need a fridge anymore. You just have a central kitchen 30 minutes away from you, and that's, you can trust the quality and the price and all that, and ready on demand for you. So that is so advanced, it's shaping the complete urban spaces.
So it's developments were there 2003, and now you're even planning cities around the last mile.
Yes, you can say that they were planning city, or just automatically the consumers demand that. You already can see within the 3-kilometer radius, there's even price difference. If your house happen to fall outside the 3-kilometer, and then that means you don't have a 30-minute guarantee, and then your housing price may be lower. So that's automatically then also buyers would demand to have so the developer or government to make sure there is a Hema shop. And
Great.
That's within.
Tiffany, thank you. This gives a very clear image of what is going on and what has been going on in China. Now I'd like to go to Aidan. Aidan, we know that in China, primary production isn't really up to standards yet. We all accept that this is the case. You've been in China as well. You know what is going on. What is your impression of primary production in China? What should be done to produce more in China? And what could China learn from things that we're doing in the Western world as well? And you are investing in high-tech solutions for being more efficient, not losing nutrients, not losing water, etc., in an ecological way even. What are you doing? Let's be very precise. How is the West optimizing in a new ecological way, using technology for that? And what could China learn from that? And as you told me in the beginning, it's still difficult in China to get it going. Why is it so difficult? So first question, what are we doing? What is our next phase in the Western world? And then we'll go to China. What can China learn from that, and why is it so difficult?
Okay,
what are we doing? What are we doing?
Okay, I think I followed. You've gone around a few times. Okay, let's just start with China. So if we look at traditional livestock production, crop production, China has got some challenges, but frankly has been solving a lot of them in dramatic ways, particularly in the last, I'd even say 3 years. Some of that has been driven by investments. Some of it has been driven by government policy. As Tiffany's mentioned, every time we see the number one document come out, agriculture is very central to the future policy directions of the Chinese party. They put a lot of effort into thinking about feeding themselves and feeding the country, and doing so in an efficient and sustainable manner. So far, we have seen, primarily driven, I would say, in the livestock sector, massive changes occurring in terms of pig production. That has also had implications for other species, chickens and ducks, and to some degree also for the milk business. And they are replicating what models are being used in the West. to produce larger numbers of animals, to produce animals more productively, to reduce the amount of wastage, reduce mortality. And diseases like African swine fever have just accelerated that trend. We've seen the number, for argument's sake, of sows drop from in excess of 50 million sows with very low productivity, and we're now we're somewhere around about 25 million. So 50% drop in the sow herd in the space of, I would say, about 3.5, 4 years. What is happening in the West is that we are embracing new technologies, particularly digital technologies. However, the speed of embracing technologies has been quite slow in the West. And that's where I see China perhaps, and even I would extend it into Africa and some other parts of the world, a leapfrogging taking place. Instead of simply replicating the Western model, perhaps the mistakes of the West, actually moving forward much faster. And China, as we understand and appreciate, is a leader in artificial intelligence, is a leader in robotics, is a leader in drones, is a leader in many, many of these 3D printers, etc., technologies. And the transfer of that technology into the agricultural space is something that I think will take place much faster in China than it has occurred in the West.
Okay. And it will occur much faster than in the West. And still, is it going fast enough?
Well, as somebody who, as you rightly said, I invest, I advise, I've worked with the British government on their policy. I've worked with some major food companies on how they engage with startups. Of course, as an investor, you want to see things move fast, but you also want to spot opportunities. So I would say that I have been disappointed in how slowly new technology rolls out in agriculture. I think farmers and agriculture in general is not only conservative, but has been burnt by overpromises in terms of technology in the past. So yes, I think we haven't made the leaps as quickly as we might. There are huge opportunities in terms of efficiencies that can be gained, but I'm an optimist as well and would say that we're going to see a lot of these technologies come to fruition quite quickly once we build the momentum behind them.
What is the promise? What is the promise of all these new technologies like drones, like even multi-cropping and drones and so on, not using pesticides anymore because you have the drones in order to do human things we didn't want to do anymore? That is why we are using pesticides. What are the big promises in the next 5 years, for example? What could they be once it is implemented at the pace you'd want?
Well, simplistically, our better run farms, for argument's sake, the ones we use for test crops, test animals, run at a 10% improvement in productivity over what we see in the field on the average farm. If you look at the genetic potential of most crops and most animals, it's about 30% above what we achieve in the field. If we start thinking about wastage of fertilizers, wastage of herbicides, pesticides, wastage of nutrients in terms of what we feed animals and what comes out the other end, we see improvements again of 30, 50% can be achieved. So that's the level of promise. And we describe ourselves as being an industry, the agricultural industry. It's a phrase we use all the time. But no other industry runs as imprecisely as agriculture does. And that's no fault of farmers. That's no fault of governments. That's just the reality of weather, genetic variation, the challenges we have of being able to precisely measure what we do, and even management can play a massive role in terms of where those inefficiencies are. But in all of those aspects, precision in terms of being able to measure, so sensors, artificial intelligence to help us with decision making, understanding precisely what happens in the organism through things like measuring genetic changes, gene expression, moving through to being able to precisely measure what happens in our cells, precision nutrition for humans. All of these are going to create massive, massive changes. And whether those will occur in the next 5 years or not is still somewhat uncertain. but definitely in the next 10, we will see a type of food production that we've never seen before.
So precision is turning it into an industry. That'll finally turn it into an industry. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, in essence, since we domesticated animals and crops approximately 10,000 years ago, excuse me, since we domesticated crops 10,000 years ago, we actually haven't changed that much. Mm-hmm. People still have a cow, they still milk the cow, they still collect the milk, and then, maybe a little bit how we process it. But we have not made very many changes, and a lot of what we know is passed from father to son, from mother to daughter, and has been like that, of course, with modern educational systems and with groups like IFAMA. We have tried to pass the knowledge to more precise, but the gap between what we know and what we should be doing is massive, and that's what we're going to bridge.
Okay. Thank you very much, Aidan. Now I'll turn to Mary. Mary, you're in between, you're connecting the dots. You're connecting primary production through processing to retailing. Information will flow. It'll flow to and from. What is going to happen? Because there are several problems. Farmers don't make any money. We make their operations more profitable, but they don't make money. That's a problem. How to make value out of this proposition? As Tiffany has shown us, there's a lot of value. Even customers demand it. They want it delivered on their doorstep, and they want it personal. Aidan is going to produce something. That is what he's doing, making it more precise, making it more ecological. Well, there are different ideas about being ecological, but we won't go into that discussion in this discussion. But what is digitization going to do in order to create value for the farmer in this chain?
Well, I think what Tiffany and Aidan have talked about describe a very interesting world. But I want to start with Aidan's premise that that the technology is going to bring this revolution in precision and create value at the farm level. And I think that is absolutely the case. We'll be able to do something better. But I see two challenges with that. When you think about connecting the dots and the fact that the historic challenge in farming is that farmers squeezed out by this very long chain and this very fragmented on their side, and then consolidated in the middle, as Tiffany was saying, an actor like, Alibaba, who's the owner of the Huma supermarkets that she was talking about, or it's not just a supermarket, it's an ecosystem that is based in a physical store that has this 3-kilometer radius that, shoppers can get anything they want, whether it's just fresh fruit ingredients or prepared meals in 30 minutes. What does that mean for the farmer? And, Aidan's world, I think, with technology and precision is all about, kind of doing more with less. That's valuable. But there's two challenges that I see with that. The first piece of it is that it's one thing to create value, but second piece is to capture value. So when you have farmers out there adopting these technologies that make them more efficient, they typically then are more efficient. They're more productive. They make more money. That typically leads them to increase their scale because they're the winners versus, the less efficient farmers down the road. And this drives, by almost to a natural state of consolidation. But yet on the other side, consumers are saying, gee, we don't like this. That, everything just keeps getting bigger. So for us, the idea of these, huge farming operations, even if it's spread off across a number of separate farms, doesn't really fit my needs. And you're forcing out kind of the fabric of the rural area by, looking at these precision, let's increase the productivity and minimize the waste, which kind of drives us to maybe a less diverse operation. because now we're really good at doing X. But these technologies that you're talking about, yeah, we know how to grow sows more efficiently, or we know how to grow corn and soybeans more efficiently. But what about the cover crops that are there? What about the other biodiversity that you're trying to manage that? And by just so finely measuring some specific things, we don't have models yet that can capture everything that goes into creating value and enhancing value. So one of the areas right now we're talking about is regenerative agriculture and soil health. There's a lot of different inputs that go into those models. So, you've got that piece of it. And then the second thing, I think the COVID impact we see here is that you can develop a very efficient system and a very efficient supply chain, but that system isn't very resilient, because you are depending on great efficiencies all the way through.
Hang on there. You're saying we shouldn't be too efficient, and actually we should be less efficient. There's a cost of efficiency.
Yeah, there's a cost of efficiency. And I think back, kind of an old story. So I'm an engineer by training, and I remember my final chemical engineering design project, and it was like, design a reactor that will do X, and I was so proud. I walked in, I had all the math worked out, and I took it to my professor, who said, okay, now add 20% to it. I said, but why? I did all the math. The math is perfect. He said, yeah, but the real world is out there, and the real world isn't perfect. So we are put together in some ways very efficient systems, but the cost of that now is when you get these outside shocks, like COVID, like with climate change and different weather conditions, then we see the implications of that now. The system is fragile.
Okay, you're proposing
a lack of efficiency.
You're proposing a different model, a not so efficient model.
Efficient model, but who pays for that? Like? Then the question is who pays for that? Because that means we have to go back, maybe to carrying some extra inventories. We have some extra capacity. But does a farm, and typically what happens is the farmer bears that cost. Because prices come down. If we produce more than we need, prices come down. Okay.
Aidan wants to, he needs to. Okay.
We know each other pretty well, but Mary, I don't accept some of the things you're saying here. Firstly,
I wouldn't expect you to, Aidan.
Well, thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. Firstly, I think that there's no doubt we see the fragility in our system. But if you had created an anti-fragile system in preparation for this black swan, you would have been wrong 39 out of the last 40 years. So we have created a very efficient system that gets food very cheaply and effectively and affordably and safely to consumers. And now we're turning around and saying, well, maybe we've got to reconsider what that system looks like. And in actual fact, we're going to spend trillions of dollars of rebuilding something. At the moment, it looks like governments are going to spend trillions of dollars shoring up the existing system. Isn't this the time to reimagine it? Isn't this the time to think differently about what we should do?
What is your answer to your own question? What should it look like?
Well, firstly, I see technologies out there, for argument's sake, the one that is allowing you to process your own milk on your own farm. And this is produced by Lely or Delaval, and it's a system that's on the farm and allows you effectively to bottle your own milk and sell directly to consumers. We see that through the internet, farmers can now connect directly with consumers and tell their story to what Mary and I like to call sometimes prosumers, consumers with a proactive approach to how they purchase, how they deal with food. The idea that you could use drones to go into a field and to precisely watch what's happening with crops also allows you to put multiple crops in the same field, allows you to harvest those crops, even though they're multi-planted all alongside each other. You can harvest them at different times, again, through robots and drones. So the promise of technology is not simply to make our farming more efficient, cheaper, more monocultural, more monocrop. It can also be to design new systems that are more sustainable, more robust, and anti-fragile.
Would you accept that?
I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you completely on that. But how do you get from the historic, kind of big, the push that technology naturally leads into? And I agree. I think that's the kind of reinventing that fabric of farming. But it's, and maybe this shock is it, but maybe it's not. Because we would need to be proactively thinking about that and supporting that transition with information, and we don't have those models yet to put forward that have been tested, because as you say, 39 years the efficient system works and one it doesn't. So that's what I'm kind of struggling with right now, but I love the idea that being able to use this digital platform to connect consumers with farmers. And I typically say consumers with farmers rather than farmers with consumers. It actually goes both ways. But the historic challenge is in agriculture is that the farmer actually doesn't see the signal of what's happening at the consumer level. So we have now, as Aidan say, you can get on some level, you can get this direct connection. Maybe you're also getting more information now through sustainability audits that are coming down and saying, oh, these are the things that are valuable for you to do that we expect you to do. So, here's the piece.
I have a question, and let's take Europe as an example. And it's a real example. We have our Green Deal. Mr. Timmermans, so the Euro Commissioner, he's my fellow countryman. He has proposed the Green Deal. And the Green Deal is going to lead the kind of Keynesian money, because it's a John Maynard Keynes type of, well, let's redo the agricultural economy, let's redo it. And the criteria from the Green Deal are leading actually the investments, the state investments in our new green economy. Suppose, Aidan and Mary, that Timmermans would ask you, what are the criteria? How am I going to spend my money? And suppose, Tiffany, that he'd say, well, we want to sell the technology, the systems we're creating to China. So please have a look. What can we apply in China? Because anyhow, you're planning cities already around the last mile. So let's plan them around primary production as well. Could you give us a hand? So now the three of you, how to define an efficient system that isn't just being efficient, producing more, but producing better, and applying it in China developing cities. So really newly applying them. What would be your answers? Mary, you're first.
Oh, I hated that. I really wanted Aidan to go first, so that way I could pick on his answer.
We'll go to Aidan then. Aidan.
Okay.
Look, I think we're back into the same problem here, as you said, Keynesian money. We're going to throw money at the problem, and inevitably, because it becomes a political thing, you're in danger of finding existing systems that will repurpose their approach or their.
But that's why we're hiring you. That's why we're hiring you. It won't be political. It will be sensible.
Didn't realize you were hiring me. Well, now we're talking something different. I think that you have to think very differently. I mean, there are constraints within what we need to do next. We need to find ways to remove the requirement for people to move around all the time. We need to remove the requirement for veterinarians, nutritionists, crop experts to be going to the farms every 10 seconds. We need to improve the quality of the management on farm. We need to improve the connection between the farm and the consumer, and we have the technologies to do it. So we need to look at planting multiple crops in a field. We need to look at systems where cows and trees coexist in the same environment. That way we get towards some of these carbon
all of a sudden
neutral.
You sound like Greenpeace.
I don't quite think I sound like Greenpeace. So if we start to apply that as the constraint, I really like some of the ways in which you make lemonade out of lemons, how you take something like COVID, or we mentioned earlier SARS, Tiffany did, that how do we create something great out of that? Applying the money to rethink the system is absolutely critical. And there are massive numbers of startups that are also worth both in Europe and globally supporting in their concepts and their ideas. We're trying to get some traction behind this. So in essence, from my perspective, I think technology can be a big part of it. I think that money needs to flow into new ideas, not into old ideas. And I think that we need to be clear what our outputs are. If our output is zero carbon footprint from farms of whatever type it needs to be, then so be it. If we're trying to maximize the reuse of manure and waste from farms rather than simply applying more fertilizers, if we want to minimize the use of antibiotics or control of disease through pesticides and insecticides, all of these things require the money to be, yes, there, but also to be very clear about how it's going to be applied.
Okay, thank you. Mary?
Yeah, so I'll come back to that. I guess, in having a chance to think a little bit more about this, the question, Dick, is that can you just develop a system for Europe, or do you need to think broadly? Because the question, how much of its own food does Europe produce now? And if you say you want that to be the same or less or more, if you say, well, gee, I want it to be the same or more, you might have some environmental trade-offs here that you really have to think about in a different way. I think, historically, the agricultural policy in Europe and the food policy in Europe has been about, let's make our countryside nice and be environmentally very secure, while pushing the burden of production off to places with less environmentally tight rules, like Brazil or Argentina or into Africa. So I think what you're talking about is a really challenging question. If I were actually building a new system ground up, I would think about, going to some place in Africa where you have greenfield. And what Aidan was saying about, in some ways, why, and Tiffany as well, why technology can be implemented, move faster so much in China, is that you had a greenfield situation. You did not have a network of supermarkets across the country when Alibaba started to work on this. So they could go in and they don't have to retrain consumers to shop differently. And that's a challenge, in the US has been, oh no, I'm going to want to go to the supermarket because I've always gone to the supermarket. My mom went to the supermarket. You don't have to, you have cellular service because you don't have a network of telephone wires that go across the country. So you can, if you're planning a city, you can say, well, gee, I don't need to build supermarkets because I can just have this very distributed piece. So I'm wondering about, if the challenge that we're seeing today is to how far we can go in terms of, rebuilding agriculture in the food system in Europe. Maybe that's an incremental change. If you wanted a transformational change, go someplace that you're not so entrenched in the existing structures.
But well, anyhow, we are in a system, and you can't actually. We're saying you can't change a system overnight.
Yeah.
It came into place over centuries, and it won't go away overnight. So we're burning money, actually. But you can restart it and redo it. For example, in China.
Yeah.
Tiffany, how would you respond to that? So China could be a greenfield recreating the agricultural system.
Are you asking me now, Dave? Because I lost your voice for a little bit. So
yes, I'm asking.
Yes. Yes, I think if without COVID-19, I think indeed in Europe and in US, this e-commerce for fresh, also the track and trace question, for example, they will go quite different track as from China, I think. But what I think we do see now is several trends are internationally converging. So we're actually heading to the same direction, although driven by different factors. But the challenges actually now the countries are facing in terms of building a more resilient regional agri-food systems, more self-sufficient, more consumer trust in shortening the chain, and also capturing more value, fair value to farmers. Those are the issues actually we all face the same. So that's where, although you have different starting point and different social-political context.
Excuse me, Tiffany. Aidan, would you agree on that? Being more local, being efficient, being more ecological, and being more local?
No, I don't. Clearly, I'm sure that's why you're asking me the question. I think that consumers like the idea, and I think that we have this sense of you're looking at flowers in Europe and you're saying they flew these in from Kenya, or you're looking at vegetables and you say, why do these things come from Israel, or why do they come from Colombia? Why can't we grow them locally? But we also have in our grocery stores, and now increasingly by home delivery, we have a range of foods that I never had when I was growing up in Ireland. You know, you can get pretty much fruits and flowers any day of the year. Some of the systems that bring them in by the modern global systems we have are extraordinarily efficient at bringing food and fruits and flowers from very far away, because of course it's, you know, refrigerated, it's use of airplanes, its use of modern delivery systems are really extremely efficient. So I think that we've got to be careful to imagine that because something was produced up the mountain, or maybe not the mountains in the Netherlands, but something that's produced locally, brought in on the back of a truck, and where there's 4 heads of lettuce and 3 carrots, that's an efficient system. It isn't. It might make you feel good that it's local and that it's from very close by, but actually you're using far more fuel and you're using it far less efficiently.
Okay. Back to you, Tiffany. Do you were talking like Carolyn Steele, who has just got out her book Citopia, the Hungry City, and now it's Citopia. And Citopia is this concept of a kind of self-sufficient city, producing locally, circularly, and that kind of stuff. And you are going into that direction, aren't you, Tiffany?
Well, I think again, what I was finish sentence. I think the consumers in the China or in the West or in Europe and US actually are all very different and have different driving factors of what they value in terms of consumer trust. In China, the consumer trust in terms of, for example, organic labeling, trustworthy product, premium product has a big part to do with concern for own health. So whether you can trust a product doesn't contain too much pesticide or bio antibiotics, for example, and that concern is now much stronger, for example. So in that sense, when you have products actually grown a little closer, so what will enhance by shortening the chain, you enhance consumer trust. And when you can enhance also consumer trust and bringing farmers closer to consumer, you can give a fairer value to farmers. And that's actually benefiting both. So in that, a shorter chain produced product, for example, especially, I'm not talking about large commodities, but let's think about in the cities, what kind of food items or types that can be efficiently produced in a short distance. Let's say 300-kilometer radius, not 3,000, but 300. We can talk about chicken, fish, vegetables, but for large commodities like wheat and corn or fruit, flowers, that very likely still be much more efficient in global system. But as much as possible, countries will be looking into more self-sufficiency, not a utopia of completely self-sufficient in everything, but as much as possible where economically makes sense, ecologically sound, and also getting the consumer trust in terms of what give them what they need, whether it's their concern for a more fairer world, which tend to be more of a case for Western consumers, or it's a trust that it's good for their own health, which is driving, for example, Chinese consumers. I think those kind of pricing, basically economic business models, will be driving for a shorter chains for certain food types. So it's not a utopia drive, but just geopolitical concerns, but also what the technology is now actually enabling efficient short chain production, especially, for example, that's what I mentioned, vegetables or white protein, for example.
Thank you, Tiffany. Mary, you're more on this, thinking from the consumer economy. Would you agree with Tiffany?
I certainly agree that consumers in different parts of the world have different needs that, when you think about sustainability in China, I think it's very much about health. Sustainability in Europe is, perhaps more so about the environment. Sustainability in the US might be more so about economic sustainability in maybe a more capitalistic model maybe with a new form of capitalism. I think, though, this issue about consumer trust can't simply be solved through local production. I think that is some piece of it. There are things, but when I think about the work that I've done in China, work with Chinese companies, and some of work, say, with Ireland, with their industries. So Ireland produces a lot of milk, goes into milk powder, and that's a very valuable product inside of China for infant formula, because the Chinese consumer doesn't trust the dairy industry in China. I don't think it trusts it if it's close or if it's far away, because of history of scandals. I'm not sure that that's something that can be solved on a local piece, even though you can have local dairies. I think from the health aspect of it, you have another region that solves that, whether it's from Ireland or from New Zealand. So I think the trust, that might bring us back to digitization. Is it that you can trust a chain now because that chain is more secured because there's digital information? We know how it goes through. I worked with Driscoll's here in the United States, so the world's largest berry company. They have a model. They own all the genetics. They produce the genetics themselves for strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, and blackberries. But they do not do the production themselves, but they do all the marketing. And they have a very fixed value sharing rule. They use technology, it's called the Delight platform, to end-to-end connect. So a picker picks raspberries in the field. They go into a package that has a specific code on the bottom. That code, when it gets to the consumers are invited to go online and say, how did this specific package of blackberry or raspberries satisfy me? What was the condition? What was the taste? What was the texture? And they can get that information back fast enough now, even though the chain can go from the consumer in Boston to the harvester, the field in Mexico. They can make real-time decisions based on that information coming back. So the consumer in Boston, where I live, is saying, gee, that raspberry actually wasn't very good. They can go back to the farmer who's growing it and saying, wait, what's going on in the field? Should we stop picking in the field? Maybe they're just a little late, so we should send it to a market that's closer by. So I think that's a system that's beyond regional, but it's backed by this, big, a wonderful brand there who's built a reputation on quality. So to bring us back to our original topic, that end-to-end piece of it is, I think, a fantastic way to think about moving this forward. It can be farm direct to consumer, but it can also be on a company level, connecting consumers and farms. And again, getting that information from the consumer back to the farm level. Driscoll's is interesting because they have a fixed price sharing model with the farmer. So they're not buying berries on the commodity market. They say for the price we get from the retailer, we will split this with you in a ratio, and it's something like, it used to be 18% goes to the grower. Actually, 18% went to Driscoll's and 82% went to the grower. So let's just use those numbers. They've actually increased on the grower side now. But and the idea there is as quality improves and the consumer is willing to pay more and the store is willing to pay more, the farmer wins and gets to capture a piece of it because the sharing model is fixed. And Driscoll's wins, so you get it becomes about a bigger pie rather than fighting over what's in the pie, the size of the pie. Now we're growing the pie, so everybody's there. And to me, that's the huge value of these new technologies is, we can come and we can talk about the bigger pie.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tiffany, Aidan, Mary. We need to talk about this much more and more often. There is something about efficiency, and efficiency obviously is important. And there is something about creating value and creating trust, and that is what consumers need to pay for, and you need to find the right balances. And in the end, it all depends on what you want, and that is a political discussion. So let's engage in these discussions. I hope Mr. Frans Timmermans is going to watch this video as well, and let's get going in order to change, well, not to burn money. Aidan, I fully agree, not to burn money, and let's develop something good. Thank you very much. And for all of you who are watching, be there the next time, we'll inform you. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you.